All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ezra Smith. I'm an attorney here in Fayetteville. I've signed up to help put together some PowerPoint and video trainings. Like I said on the other in-person training, I'm really sorry that we can't do this in person. With 2020 and everything going on, I think this is the best we can do. And with that said, I hope this can be a great resource and guide for you. This is the poll watching training for absentee canvassing and counting. So if you are a poll watcher who signed up to do in-person voting poll watching, like for early voting or election day, that's actually a different training. This is for folks who are going to be observing the canvassing and counting of mail-in or absentee ballots in Arkansas. So with that said, let's get started. So the right to poll watch is statutory. You may have heard me say this if you've gone through the other training, but Arkansas law permits every candidate, political party, and organization that is fighting for or against a constitutional amendment to have a representative on site for the counting of votes. And so that person has the power to oversee the election process. They also have the power to challenge certain processes. So we're going to get into that as we move on through this PowerPoint. But just for the basics, things that you need to know generally. The first question, who can be a poll watcher? And that's really, like I said, anybody. I believe you have to be 18 and you have to have the sign off of your candidate or political party or group. But outside of that, all you need is their sign off and your willingness. So expect lawyers, non-lawyers, anybody. Now, the most important thing you'll need to actually be a poll watcher is an authorization form. And so it looks just like this. You can see here it's got whether you're representing a candidate or a group or a party, places for them to fill in their information, and then you sign it. And you have that signature notarized. And then it needs to bear the signature of the county clerk. So this is not a document to sleep on. You need to, if you're working with us, get this document from us. If you're working with a different group or campaign or political party, you want to make sure that they have signed off on your authorization and that you have taken it or they've taken it to the county clerk for their signature. Because this is what you'll need. This is your ticket in the door, and it'll be very difficult to do this the day of. So I recommend planning ahead. I know that early voting starts soon, but we just have to get after it. Okay, so what should you bring with you as a poll watcher? Well, I'll stop talking about it, but it is so important, and that's your poll watcher authorization form. Like I said, that is your ticket in the door. You'll need appropriate clothing, so nothing political, nothing suggestive of politics, nothing that could potentially be read as election interference, and that is a pretty broad rule. You'll need a mask, a bottle of water. You'll need paper, clipboard, pens, or a tablet. However, you're going to keep a track of the voters' names, which is such an important job, and I'll talk about that later. If you have a tablet, obviously you'll need your cell phone, but if you have a cell phone and a tablet, bring chargers for each, because you'll probably run the power down on both of them, just because it's a long day, or depending on how much time you're working, you'll be on your phone a lot. That's because you'll be either using the hotline. So this hotline here is, this hotline here is our number, but there are other numbers that may apply if you're doing it with a different group or party. So just know that. And then Voter View, which is a very helpful tool. This is a link you can use to check people's voter registration status and address in Arkansas. So very, very helpful tool. Okay, so let's get started. There are basically two stages. There's canvassing the absentee ballots, and then there's counting ballots. So we're going to start with canvassing. Canvassing is the process by which we, or poll workers, not we, but poll workers open the absentee paperwork, the outer envelope. And by executive order, due to the coronavirus, that period was extended into 2 weeks before Election Day. So that would be the same Monday that early voting begins. Some counties may begin canvassing their mail-in ballots. Now, that's because absentee ballots by law must be opened and processed by the clerks before the close of Election Day. And all ballots, as a general rule, all absentee ballots must contain a form of photo ID to be considered regular. If they're not, they'll be considered provisional, and we'll talk about what that means towards the end. Okay, so this process is a little technical, and you'll have handouts and sheets you can look at, so forgive me when you're there the day of, but for the purposes of this PowerPoint, I've had to take a lot of that language and extrapolate it onto this, and it's not always the easiest to follow, but I've tried as best I could. So the rules for opening absentee ballots, and this is very important because I think it's helpful for you to know all the processes, because it'll be your job to check and make sure that they're being followed. So the first step is that a clerk will, while being observed by a second clerk, because there's a redundancy and an oversight built in just through the process here, despite our oversight, which is really kind of a third redundancy. These clerks are going to be working in tandem through this process. So on the observation of another, we'll open the outer envelope and we'll verify the voter statement, the photo identification, and that the ballot has properly been placed. Now, if for some reason their voter statement and the ID are in a separate envelope, or there's some discrepancy, the first clerk will read that voter's name aloud and the precinct according to their voter statement. Then the second clerk will check that list to confirm who they are. They then compare all of the identifying information, the name, address, date of birth, signature, on the application against that which is in the voter statement. So that's a document. The voter statement is a document that accompanies the absentee ballot. They compare that identification, and if it matches, if it's in order, then they place that ballot in the absentee ballot box, and that ballot will be considered a regular ballot. Okay, so the canvassing period is basically the exterior check. And if you pass that, then you'll go on to the actual voting or tallying of the ballot. And they're going to repeat that process, so you'll see that happening all day while you're there. Now, if there is a problem like the voter statement and the ID are not there, then again, we have our two clerk process. They're going to remove and inspect. And if they find what they're looking for and they can put it all together, they're going to return back into the envelope. So you can follow this. And like I said, if you get confused at any point in this process, we'll be providing handouts too that you can have with you. That'll be a step-by-step that you can just follow along. I know it can be like, clerk who does what, but it's quite simple when you see it happen a few times. They're just checking, keep in mind, they're just checking to make sure that they can put all this information together if they have it, right? I mean, I think you'll see that the clerks will make a diligent effort to cast ballots appropriately. But it'll be a crucial part of your job to be checking in on that process just to make sure that there aren't mistakes being made or whatever. And we'll talk about how to kind of keep an eye out for these issues. So guidelines to be thinking about as you observe these clerks doing their work, or commission workers doing their work. If there's any doubt, they're going to probably be set aside. Now, absentee ballots, the general rule, absentee ballots that lack photo ID or sufficient ID will also be turned into provisional ballots. And like I said, we're going to talk about that. A very important part of this job, and a very important part of being a poll watcher, is the power to challenge ballots. And so if you've done in-person poll watching, you know that there's a time and a place to challenge a voter's eligibility to vote. Well, it's a similar instance here in the case of absentee balloting. Now, you have to make your challenge at the appropriate time when this ballot is being considered and called out by the clerks. And the ground rules here are also similar to in-person voter challenges. You can challenge the eligibility or the fact that they have already voted. Now, keep in mind, your challenge to a ballot basically puts it in the pile that will be reviewed at a later time. So this note here is to remind you, the final decision will not happen at the canvassing stage. The final decision will happen in front of the commission as they go through and sort the provisional ballots. And for whatever reason they've been made provisional, the county will check against its records and make a determination. So just a note on that. Now, there's also a process for when a ballot becomes provisional, which we're going to talk about here. And just like a ballot challenge, and I don't know if I said this, but when you challenge a ballot, you have to fill out a form. You have to actually state the grounds for your challenge. And on that note, I should say, be very mindful of the poll watchers around you and the challenges that they're making, and to see if those are appropriate or if those are in bad faith. And in all cases, if you see an irregularity or there's a problem with another poll watcher, your first and only line of recourse in person is to go to the election sheriff or judge. They may have a different name depending on where you are, but the term just means the person who's in charge of that precinct or canvassing spot. So there'll be a person that you route all of these problems to, and then also call the hotline. But my point being, if you see someone challenging ballots and you think, oh, this is wrong, this doesn't seem to comport with the rules, the first mission is to go straight to the election sheriff and say, hey, there's a problem here that we need to resolve. This is happening incorrectly. But anyway, provisional ballots will be set aside, like I was saying, and go before the commission. Now, that's kind of step one, and you'll see processes there that'll happen probably throughout the day of going through and just canvassing the ballots. Do the ballots have the basic things that they need to confirm the voter is who they are, who they say they are, and that they have their ballots so that we can tabulate it when the counting phase comes. So moving out of step one into step two, that's counting the votes. And the first question is, find out what your local precinct and county, what their plan is. Now, there are rules in place, certainly, but each county and each precinct, depending on just the configuration, may have a different plan. So you are the eyes on the ground here. You are the person who is closest to this information. When you are there working as a watcher for absentee canvassing, a very important question to ask is, hey, what is the process, and when and where are we going to do the actual tabulation of the ballots? So that's the first thing to think about. Now, when you, and this is what I was saying, I said there are rules, right? So absentee ballots must be processed within a certain time period. Now, that processing cannot begin prior to 8:30 on election day, but you'll need to figure out exactly the contours and the precise details of when and how this is going to happen in your county. The process is simple, though. So for a regular ballot that is not a provisional, they will open the ballot, count any write-in votes first, and then count the remaining ballots either by hand, probably unlikely, more likely they'll be tabulating them electronically. That takes us to step three. Step three is the process by which the County Board of Election Commission reviews provisional ballots. And so, like I said, any ballot that for whatever indiscrepancy or problem, or problem at the canvassing stage, if there is a problem, it turns into a provisional ballot. So provisional balloting is the kind of the last stop, right? The final check for a vote that we think maybe there's a problem here, but we're going to give it more scrutiny. So like I said, it's election commissioners who make this final decision. This is not a decision that's made at the canvassing stage. The canvassing stage raises challenges, right, that are resolved here. So there are guidelines. There are rules in place, and you can have copies of these rules with you when you're watching this. If a name of a voter has been challenged, right? So John A. Doe versus John Doe. The question is does it compare to the other information, right? Do we have enough here that just an average person can say, yeah, I based on the date of birth or the address or the signature or a combination, can say this is this person. Now, dates of birth and addresses, they have to match. Names can be similar, signatures can be similar. Dates of birth and addresses must match for purposes of validating a provisional ballot. Now, like I said, signatures just have to be close. Election officials are not handwriting experts, right? So close, not perfect, and certainly no mirror image rule or anything like that to say that a signature has to be identical. Now, there are circumstances where absentee ballots just outright by law should be rejected. And now if they come in some kind of bulk mailing from someone else other than a long-term facility, right? So if you're elderly, you're in a nursing home, that's different. But if it's coming from bulk mailing and they can't identify what's going on or it's not that, it's likely to be rejected. If no voter statement is accompanying the absentee ballot, it'll be rejected. And if there is a discrepancy that they cannot sort out, right, like it does not match, for whatever reason, date of birth, address, etc., that vote will also not be counted. So these are, you hate to describe these rules. It's never a good thing when a vote is not counted, but as important as it is to know the rules about how to count votes, it's also important to know the boundaries, so you can say, okay, yes, this vote was not counted, but this is legal, this is appropriate. And that list goes on. If it has a different address or bearer, I forgot about that, the fourth reason, but you can understand why it makes sense. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a play on that as we wrap up. I want to give you some examples of the comparisons that'll be made, and what the election commission uses to teach their workers on what to accept versus reject. So the first one is an example of similar signatures, and you can see here, right, this is pretty close. Is it the same? No, but it doesn't have to be. Everything else matches. We can tell that this is the person who they say they are, right? This is John Davidson. Now, second example, not signed, right? Nothing to compare it to. This is not enough. This does not count. Here, the date of birth doesn't match, right? We said addresses and dates of birth must match. That makes sense. So this also doesn't count. Here, the designated bearer doesn't match as cast, right? We have different names here. So this should be cast as provisional, and the ultimate outcome, I would say, is close. We're not really sure what we would do, though the voter statement itself looks complete. The problem, the discrepancy that doesn't match, means it's a close bet. Okay, so in wrapping up, the best practices for poll workers, right, and I'm just going to throw these out here, are going to be to follow these processes like we've described, right? So if you see irregularity in these processes, if they are not making verbal call-outs, right, if they are not repackaging the envelopes appropriately, if they're just not using good clerical skills, that is a problem that you as a poll watcher need to document, and that to the degree that you can step in and either convince the election sheriff or advocate to the election sheriff for a change in process, that is very helpful. But you as the person on the ground can be of huge help later on, generating the facts and maintaining the narrative of what was going on with poll workers. Best practices for you, right, in addition to what I've talked about, is remember that this is a hard job, and this is, it is technical. It'll feel like a lot is going on around you. So be patient with yourself and recognize that the hotline is just a phone call away. If you see things that don't make sense or have questions, or you see something that you think is wrong, for whatever reason, just call the hotline. We will help you, right? Or whoever your party or candidate, whoever that is, they will help you, or at least connect you with folks who know what's going on. Watch for patterns and systems. Are certain voters being called out or given more focus than others? Can you track that? You'll hear some things, you'll be able to see some things, you'll not be able to capture every ballot. But if you see patterns emerging in the way that voters are being treated, or absentee ballots are being treated, or certain rules that maybe favor or disfavor, jot these kind of things down. These are really important, and no one's going to note it if you don't. And then this is the really, really, really big deal. Biggest thing that you can do, so important. Keep a list of voters who are made from regular ballots to provisional ballots. First, last name, whatever you get. The more identifying information you can get on the voter, the more helpful that data point is later on. But this is a huge help to everyone involved, because votes that are made provisional and are deficient for whatever reason need to be cured. It may be impossible to cure it if we cannot track who the voter is and do the follow-up externally to make sure that that vote is cast. So it's a huge, huge, huge help. In closing, I would just say, much like in-person poll watching, the relationships that you build and the way that you can utilize your own soft power in this space will determine how effective you are. These poll workers, for the most part, are not out there trying to disenfranchise voters. Many of them also have a lot of experience doing this and would consider themselves highly proficient at it. Your job, though, exists to be that third redundancy. Your job is to make sure that even though we have an extra clerk, even though we have these processes in place, we recognize that there will either be human error or even the potential for intentional problems. You can be that third guardrail and that person who is keeping track of what's going on, relaying things as they're happening, and keeping a narrative. If there is a discussion or follow-up to what happened in the room that day, it's essential. And to the degree that you can cultivate a great relationship with your election judge, it will mean that your opinion and your feedback and the wisdom that you provide from these rules will go all that much farther in ensuring that their processes are correct. So in close, we just want to say thank you so much. Thanks for bearing through this PowerPoint. I know it was a little janky at times. We're doing everything we can to get ready to protect the vote in 2020. And we are so thankful that you have signed up to help. So if you have questions, call us. If you have anything that you need, call us. We want to help you be successful at this, and we're just so thankful for your time. So good luck. You're going to do a great job.